Hi there. This is a very short lecture to talk a little bit about the overall way of going to start up a business, the way that we teach at Mashari, and then we're going to go from there into what makes a good problem to solve or a good venture idea. So the old way of starting a business was you basically developed a sort of 20-page business plan and went ahead and just started your business and hoped it would work. In the last decade or so, this has changed. There's a far more scientific approach, and that's really the approach we take at Mashari. To put in context, there's three key risks that we address when we're trying to start a new venture. The first one is market risk. That means, is it actually desirable, the product or solution that you're developing? The second, the technical risk, is it feasible? Can you actually produce this product? Can you develop it? Do you have the skills, the competency? Is the technology even available? And thirdly, the financial risk. So is this idea viable? Can you sort of generate more money than you spend? Is it something that you can sustain into the future? And all three of those risks are of equal value in that if one of them fails, then fundamentally your startup's going to fail. But there is some logic behind which one you should approach first, and that is really the market risk is the one to approach first, because in one way it's a little easier to measure that risk, but secondly the other risks sort of come out of that. So when you look at the market risk, what you're doing is trying to understand whether there really is a market for the product and your product fits the market. And only when you have that can you really understand what you're trying to build. And that's really when you get into the technical risk. When you look at things like how much the market will pay for your product, those are elements, and what's it going to cost to build that product, obviously all build into the financial risk. So although all are important and one needs to think a little bit about them simultaneously, the one to start off with is market risk, which is where we look at it in Mashari, although not ignoring the other two either. And there's been, I guess, two related concepts that we build on. The one is the lean startup concept, introduced by Eric Ries, which really talks about how you go about starting a business through developing hypotheses, testing them, and learning from that. So it's not a matter of building the final product and then seeing what happens. It's going to the market, building hypotheses. So for instance, would this type of solution work, and finding some way of testing that, or would customers pay for this product, and finding some way of testing that at a very low cost, very quick basis, and putting that test into the market, seeing what happens, and from the learning either move on to the next test or say, hey, that didn't work, and go back and do some refinement. So that's the lean startup, and Eric Ries basically built that off of another well-known professor, Steve Blank from Stanford, who wrote a book called Customer Discovery, and Eric was in fact one of Steve's pupils. And customer discovery is really says there's sort of two broad areas to starting a new venture. The first is trying to get to product market fit. So that's where you're trying to find out, is there really a market? Can you find a product to fit that market? Will it be something that the market is willing to pay for and needs and wants? And only once you've got that right, and that's very much lean startup type process, to experiment and find that. Once you've got that product market fit, you move into the second part of customer discovery, which is all about growing and scaling. It doesn't mean you aren't still experimenting, but you're you've got a business model, testing in the second phase, whereas in the first phase you're really trying to identify what is that business model, and does it look like it hangs together, all the separate elements. So really what we're trying to do is discover a working business model and then scale it. And that's really the principle behind starting a new venture in a way that is going to de-risk it as much as possible and give you a higher probability of success. So that moves into a sort of the next section, which what makes for a good venture idea. So broadly, there's two types of ventures. There's what we call a lifestyle venture, which is a business that will perhaps feed you and your family, or maybe it'll be a little bigger and employs 5 or 10 people, or 50, or maybe 100 people. But fundamentally, it's not a very large business, and it's one that can grow to a certain level, and that's probably it, unless you think about things like franchising it or taking it further in that type of way. The other area is a sort of high growth business that has a possibility to become huge and global. So, for instance, something like Spotify or Facebook or Instagram or any of those big tech plays. And it isn't that one of these is right and one of them is wrong. It all depends on what your purpose and what your passion is. And frankly, it's probably more of a spectrum than a dichotomy. But you know when you're really aiming for a very high growth business, and you know when you're in a lifestyle area, and if you're sort of stuck in the middle, you probably need to think that through. So what sort of drives that decision is really your purpose and your passion. What do you want to achieve? What are you trying to do? Where do you really want to make a difference? And it's not that one is wrong and one is right. By no means. It's just what you want to build and grow. But no matter which one of those areas you're going for, the key thing that sort of says you have a good venture idea or not is a good venture idea has a very clear customer and a very well-defined problem that customer faces. And that's fundamental to both those types of venture, be it lifestyle or high growth. You really need to have a real clear customer in your mind, understand what their problem is and how you're going to solve it. So, for instance, a problem like climate change or food poverty, that's not really a problem that a startup can address. You might have some small impact on one of those big, wicked problem areas, but you're not really addressing that. You are trying to address a specific customer and their specific problem. If in the process you do something good like impact on climate change, that's great, but normally that's just too big, a problem for you to address. So that's the first fundamental element that makes up for a good venture idea. Then other things which are important for, once again, both lifestyle and high growth are there needs to be a real need for your product. Someone really wants that product. They want to buy it. You need to be in a space where there's no real existing solution, or the solution the customers has at the moment is really unsatisfactory, and they're not happy, and they're looking for something new or different and better. And thirdly, you need a product that there's someone is willing to pay for it. So you don't have a good venture idea if it's a great idea, but no one's going to part with money for it. So those three things, a real need, no satisfactory solution, willingness to pay, are really critical to both those types of businesses. Then again, if you're looking at high growth, there's a couple more elements that are essential to categorize your idea as being probably good. First of all, it must be addressing a large market size. If you're not addressing a large market, your business cannot grow beyond a certain size. So even if you had 100% of the market, but the market wasn't huge, 100% of something big isn't big itself. So you need to be addressing a very large market, and otherwise you just cannot grow. It becomes a constraint. And if you're looking at a high growth company, you're probably, not always, but probably going to be looking for funding. And if you speak to any investor, one of the first questions they're going to ask you is, how big is the market you're addressing? Because if it's not a sort of $1 billion or a plus, they're not going to be particularly interested. Secondly, you need to have a business model that is scalable, one that you can grow very quickly, very rapidly, and have some impact on that market size. So gaining some significant share. So you need to be able to build your product and deliver and sell and communicate your product at scale. And that means the more you're selling, the more you're producing, the lower the cost per unit actually is. And lastly, you need some sort of defensible position, so something that is not really copyable by a competitor. This can get a little bit vague. On the one hand, you could have a clear patented technology that is protectable by law. It's great to be in that position. Often it's not that case. You need to have a sort of maybe a very different business model where the pieces hanging together make it very, very hard to copy. Or perhaps you're first into a market and you grab market share, and if you're in the first mover, it might be one of those markets where you get advantage. That's not always the case by any means, but sometimes it is the case. So you need to have a defensible position. So if your venture idea can tick those boxes, a clear customer in mind with a clear defined problem, a real need, no or unsatisfactory solution, someone willing to pay, large market size, scalable and defensible. If you've got that, then you've got a good venture idea. If you can't tick all those boxes, well, maybe not large market size or scalable, you might be able to produce something in the lifestyle area, certainly not in the high growth area. So think about those things when you're developing your venture ideas.